The chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, once spoken as a rising star of British politics, has resigned. This comes a day after he said that the party's newest MP asking a question in the House of Commons about banning a burqa was dumb. What on earth is going on with that party? We'll discuss on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we were originally going to do this episode in two halves. We were going to talk about what's going on with Donald Trump because he's just announced a ban on arrivals into the US from a whole load of countries, and we thought that was interesting. And then we're going to have a visit from Jeremy Hunt, former Chancellor, former Foreign Secretary, former Health Secretary, because he's got a book out, and also there's lots of interesting things to ask him about the current Tory party. But then, just as we were getting ready to record all of that, we got some bombshell news that Zia Yusuf, the chair of Reform UK, was resigning. So we've scrapped lots of our plans and brought in Alex Forsyth instead. Hope that doesn't make you feel unwell.
Yeah, it really does.
Sorry.
We had such good plans,
but now
and now we've
you.
Ended up with you.
Right. So before, let's do this. Let's not do this the way around that the news normally does it, which is like
let's not make this simple and straightforward.
No. I do want to make it simple.
Okay,
like before we talk about his departure, just why was Zia Yusuf such a key figure in Reform that his departure is such a big deal for everyone? Let's do it that way around.
Let's do it that way around. So Zia Yusuf was, as you say, the party chairman. Who is he? Well, he was a sort of self-made millionaire who set up a business, a kind of app that made him a lot of money. And then he got interested in politics and he joined up to Reform UK and he donated to the party and he became the party chairman. And the reason he matters is because Nigel Farage, after the election in July 2024 last year, realised that the party had a lot of work to do in getting itself in order, what he called professionalising.
And it was things like they didn't know how to vet their candidates properly.
Yeah, which is why we had all of those candidates who were highly condemned for the comments they made during the general election campaign. So it was things like that. But it was also they had no structure. So a political party isn't just about the MPs you see. There's all the stuff that goes beneath that, the activists, the sort of structures that sit below it. And Reform didn't really have any of that at all. They scaled up quite quickly in the general election. And then they realised to sustain it, they had to put some of that in place. So in comes Zia Yusuf, and Nigel Farage effectively puts him in charge of this mission to professionalise Reform UK. So yeah, he was doing stuff around candidates, but he was also doing stuff like setting up branches across the country so that Reform had a bit more of a base, that it could attempt to attract more members in, setting up these sort of local party structures. And he did a lot of work in the run-up to the local elections in May around that, getting the sort of party machine in order. So he was pretty instrumental to the kind of attempt from Reform to be a sort of proper, more structured, more organised machine.
And also, let's put it this way. When you were doing that programme for Radio 4 that goes out on New Year's Eve, where all the wise correspondents around the BBC make their predictions for the year, and you were asked who's the person to watch in British politics, didn't you say Zia Yusuf?
Yeah, you just reminded me of that. I did. I said he's
because I
he's a
dined
key
out
player.
on that from January the 1st.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were right.
Well, I was sort of right because he's only going to be around half the year.
Right, so that's the background. Let's do the news then. So he posted a post on X, and he said, announcing his departure, he said, 11 months ago, I became chairman of Reform. I've worked full-time as a volunteer to take the party from 14% to 30%. He means in the polls. I've quadrupled its membership and delivered historic electoral results. I no longer believe working to get a Reform government elected is a good use of my time and hereby resign the office. That's quite a put-down way of leaving, isn't it?
Yeah, there's only sort of one way you can read that, isn't it? But what you do need to know is a little bit of the background and what had happened before that. And that had been this row that sort of developed throughout Thursday because Sarah Pochin, who is the newest Reform MP after she won a by-election in Runcorn and Helsby, had this moment where she got to ask a question at Prime Minister's Questions, which, as we know, for MPs who aren't always in the spotlight, that can be quite a moment. And she chose to ask about a ban on burqas. Now, Zia Yusuf then saying that was dumb because that wasn't party policy. So the backdrop was this sort of slightly bubbling dispute publicly between the chairman and the party's new MP that they're really keen to promote. And then after that was sort of simmering quietly through Thursday, 5:30 Thursday evening, this lands from Zia Yusuf that he's quitting.
Although it sounds like that might have been the straw that broke the camel's
I
back
think that's
rather
right.
than the reason.
Absolutely right. I think that is
Because there'd
right.
been some tension brewing in the days before, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, there have. And I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know the full story. I really don't know the full story. But I think that it was about the role that he had, the amount of autonomy that he had in the party. Was he entirely happy with that? And from another perspective, there are people saying he wasn't always the easiest person to work with in the party. So these things never come entirely out of the blue. It did feel like it at 5:30 when something we had to do
and
all
of
of the
course,
6
Zia
o'clock
Yusuf was
news,
involved when Rupert Lowe, who was a Reform MP, exited the party in quite dramatic circumstances too. Zia Yusuf had been involved in that whole situation as well, and Rupert Lowe had been very, very critical of him publicly, and they'd had a big spat.
Yeah. I think that the consequences of all this are quite interesting. So the first thing to say about the kind of way it happened, and even though it didn't come out of the blue and that there was clearly context, so as you say, Zia Yusuf and Rupert Lowe had fallen out very, very publicly. There was this reporting, and I don't know how true it is, about whether Zia Yusuf was being given enough clout from his perspective to do what he wants to do. Recently, where he's really been focused is on the work that Reform says it's doing in the councils it controls to try and cut down on wasteful expenditure. So that's been his focus. And then, like I said, this other thing about whether or not he got on with everybody in the party, question mark. But those are some of the things that are sort of being kicked around. But with all of that in the background, it still felt really unexpected when we got the actual confirmation he quit, because he's such a central figure in Reform UK. And to confirm that, Nigel Farage, when he was speaking on his GB News show, said that he was only given 10 minutes notice of the fact that Zia Yusuf was resigning. So that does tell you something about the way that this all happened. For a man that I was actually at a press conference with Nigel Farage a week ago, and Zia Yusuf was sat next to him on the platform. So, it's sort of that whatever's happened, it's happened fairly quick.
Also, the reaction from Reform people on social media has been quite interesting, because in the immediate aftermath of his resignation, all the messages were quite supportive and friendly, and politics is a rough old business, sorry if you didn't enjoy it, also thanks for all the work that you've done to help us, we'll always be very grateful. That lasted for about 10 minutes, because then Nigel Farage goes on GB News and says no, it was not amicable, and actually that all starts to break down quite quickly, and it becomes not quite so friendly.
Although even on GB News, I think Nigel Farage did pay tribute to Zia Yusuf for all the work that he'd done. I think there are senior people in the party that genuinely credit Zia Yusuf with being quite instrumental in what's happened to Reform UK over the course of the past year or so since the general election, where they got themselves into a position that they did take control of 10 local authorities, big local authorities in England at the local elections, and where their polling position has been pretty consistently high. And I do think genuinely there are people that think Zia Yusuf has played a big part in that. And that was definitely the initial message that we got, not just from Nigel Farage, but from Richard Tice, of course, one of the MPs. There was like this flurry of people paying tribute to the work that Zia Yusuf had done. But it's clear from when you listen to Nigel Farage on GB News that there was sort of something else going on as well. And he sort of made some comments to this question about how was Zia Yusuf to work with? Did he get on with everybody? And he said there that he was always polite to Nigel Farage, but personnel skills were not top of Zia Yusuf's list. So, that's the kind of context. But I think the challenge now for Reform UK isn't just the fact that they're going to have to find somebody else. They might have already, I'm not sure, but they're going to have to find somebody else to fill that role of doing the work that Zia Yusuf was given to do, about kind of broadening the party's base and getting its ducks in a row and making sure it's a professional operation and all of that. But what it also does is leave them open to this accusation that Nigel Farage has faced before, that he falls out with people. We saw it with Rupert Lowe, who was one of only a handful of MPs. Now, whoever you want to say, whatever you want to say happened there, it was a public dispute between two senior figures at the top of Reform UK. And already, so the response from the other political parties is saying, well, look, this is another example of a sort of dispute spilling over into public. Now, I'm sure that Nigel Farage from UK would say this happens in all political parties. It's maybe just magnified because we're quite small and there's a lot of a focus on us at the moment. But it is true that there have been kind of public splits, not just within Reform UK, but within other parties that Nigel Farage has played senior roles in before.
Alex, thank you very much.
Pleasure as ever.
Now, before Alex came in here, the person sitting on that sofa was Sir Jeremy Hunt, former Foreign Secretary, former Health Secretary, former Chancellor, I missed out. Former Culture Secretary.
Was there a job he didn't have? No, that's
Yeah, he was never Home Secretary.
He was chair
or
of the
Defence
Health Select
Secretary.
Committee for a while,
Yeah,
wasn't he?
true. One of his finest hours. Anyway, he's got a new book out called Can We Be Great Again, where he's thinking big thoughts about the challenges in the world and how Britain can step up and meet some of those challenges, and that people maybe shouldn't talk Britain down just yet. So here's my conversation with Jeremy Hunt, which was kind of happening as the Zia Yusuf news was unfolding. So you'll hear a little bit of how he reacted in real time to that. Hello.
Hi.
I sort of expected you to come in with a quill. Now, I think of you as an author rather than a full-time politician. We will talk about the book plenty. Do you want to give us just the elevator pitch, though, for people who like? What's the verbal version of the blurb?
It's this, that we have got into a funk as a country. We've got totally depressed about ourselves. And when I was Foreign Secretary, I had this incredibly gleaming office. And I was asking myself, I'm sure David Lammy has asked himself the same question. Is this just an imperial delusion? Or are we
basically like a leftover from a different era?
Yeah, or are we actually a big and powerful country? So when I stepped down, I thought, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to research this properly. And I took the 8 biggest problems the world faces, from the future of democracy to climate change to migration, all these areas. And I found without doubt the experts are saying that the UK is one of the top 10 most influential countries, often one of the top 5. And my argument is not that we haven't got lots of problems, but this is such a dangerous world. Let's roll our sleeves out, get out there and start trying to fix these problems.
And in terms of your process, you started writing this when you left office, but then it got disrupted by being hired again by Liz Truss.
Yes, I mean, the book's called Can We Be Great Again? I'm not a MAGA conservative, but it is about whether we can get our confidence back. And I started off having been Foreign Secretary, and I wanted, to spend more money on defence and to be more forthright in defending democracy and free societies. When I became Chancellor and I came back to the book, I, of course, had to tackle the thorny question of how the hell you pay for it all. And so it became a slightly different book because I realised, which I hadn't fully understood before, there is an iron link between political clout and a strong economy. But, one thing about our economy, it gets a lot of knocking, and, Rachel Reeves is going through some of the very difficult decisions that I went through. But we're the 6th largest economy in the world. And what do the experts say? In 15 years' time, we will still be the 6th largest economy in the world.
I have to say, I was quite surprised reading the book when you said you only realised the importance of economic growth and the government's fiscal position and budgets when you went into the Treasury. You've done quite a few government jobs before that.
Yeah, of course I understood it in theory, but I think in a way I wasn't planning to tackle it in the book. But having been Chancellor, you have to tackle that issue. I feel for Rachel Reeves. Next week we're going to hear from her. She's got a big set of dilemmas because the public finances were very tight for me, just as they are for her. But I do think that if you look at the most exciting thing about this country, which very few people know, is that after the United States and China, we have the largest technology sector in the world. So the reason people don't know about it is because we don't have that many British tech names. But if you actually look, London is the 2nd global hub for AI after San Francisco. And we churn out more AI graduates than anywhere else in Europe. And if I was going to point to one thing, I'm in sort of let's be optimistic.
You're being a booster. Boris Johnson style.
Yeah,
almost.
Not quite Boris style. I don't think people would probably say that about me. But, if I was going to say one thing that gives me confidence that we can pay for the NHS and our armed forces and all these things in 20 years' time when my kids have grown up, it is if we become the world's next Silicon Valley, that will be incredible. And I think we really can.
If we've got all these strengths, why do you think our sense of ourselves as a country has sunk so low?
Lots of reasons. Pandemic, energy shock, global financial crisis, stagnating living standards. But probably the Brexit wars are the main culprit, because you've got a lot of hardcore Remainers who feel that we can never succeed as a country outside the EU. And you've got a lot of hardcore Brexiteers who are very disappointed that it hasn't been as brilliant as they were hoping. And my own view is we're perfectly capable of making a big success outside the EU, But it's up to us. No one's going to give it to us on a plate, and we've got to make the most of that position.
But okay, you say it was kind of Brexit and all those other things. Do you think, like, your average voter is entitled to feel that things are a bit rubbish? Because you're sort of telling them that they're wrong.
Not at all.
No?
I think your average voter is concerned that elected politicians are not tackling the big problems we face, when it comes to whether it's the NHS or fixing potholes or getting crime down or sorting out small boats. And, they are right to be worried. I don't want to sort of get into defending my government's record, but we didn't get everything right, for sure. My argument's a different one. It is that there, at the same time as all those problems, which people are right to be worried about, there are some really dangerous problems in the world. We've got a European war. We've got the rise of China, which is, Xi Jinping is focused on upending democracy around the world. We've got climate change. We've got a global migration crisis. And I think there are people who would say, let's just ignore all that. Let's focus on our problems at home. And the answer, truthfully, is, if we have a war, ordinary people will suffer the most. And the right question to ask is, who are the countries that can actually stop these terrible things happening? I would say the same to a bunch of French people or Australians or Germans or Americans. Countries with influence need to get out and use it.
To make this really tangible to people, give me an example from one of your great offices of state where you wanted to do something really big or bold or good, and the system or our politics or something just got in the way and you couldn't do it. Just give us a really clear example so people can get their heads around what it's like governing and why it's so hard to do great stuff.
Okay, if I, as Chancellor, I really wanted to balance the books, and it was really tough, as Rachel Reeves is finding now. The only game in town is proper welfare reform, because if we got the welfare bill for adults of working age down to just the levels of 5 years ago before the pandemic, that saves about £49 billion a year. And that's enough to spend more on defence. It's also good for the individuals involved. But, Mel Stride, who was the Work and Pension Secretary, and I, we wanted to do it. Rishi Sunak wanted to do it. But it was the year before an election, and we just got timed out. And, what I would say to Rachel Reeves, she probably doesn't want the advice, but what I would say to her is she's got a large majority, 4 years left in Labour's mandate. This is a very important social reform, not easy, but for people with mental illness, being parked on benefit is the worst possible outcome. If we really want to help people, we need to make it easy for them to get back into work.
Isn't it just that the reason you couldn't do that reform is because lots of people were opposed to it, because actually they think it's good that people with mental health conditions are supported by the state? Well, they just disagreed with you.
I don't think we ever got to the point where we were able to put forward a strong package. But just to be clear, I want people with mental illness to be supported by the state. I changed the law in the NHS so that we treated mental health better when I was health secretary, and we treat 2 million more people a year. My argument is if someone is mentally ill, we need to give them treatment, not sign them off work, because every doctor will say that people with mental illness, social contact is really important.
But just to go back to kind of my initial question here about why it's so difficult to get change, and you can certainly feel that the conversation around that is moving in your direction. Rachel Reeves says similar things about people being trapped on the benefit system, as she would see it. Why is it so hard to change our benefit system to get to a better place?
Well, there's always noise, but the trick in politics is to take the big radical decisions early when you can, because the Overton window of possibility,
basically what's possible politically,
closes quite quickly. But I want to give another example, if I may,
please do.
From the book. We have on Saturday we had record numbers of small boat crossings, and there is a global migration crisis, actually caused by the very positive fact that there is a lot less poverty in the world, and that means people can afford to move, and they are moving. And we urgently need to rip up and rewrite all the international law, the European Convention on Human Rights, the Refugee Convention, not because we don't want it, but just because it was written in the 1940s and it needs updating for a modern, globally mobile world. And we happen to be the only major country who is led by a prime minister who is a human rights lawyer. Literally no one knows this law better than Keir Starmer. He could lead an international coalition because every developed country faces this issue, get that law rewritten and give people confidence that we do once again have control of our borders. So that's an example to me of something where there really is a solution. It takes a bit of ballsiness
A bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's negotiating with 40 plus other countries.
Yes, but, those are all countries that are having to grapple with this issue. And everyone is desperate for a solution, whether it's America or the EU or us or Australia. Everyone is looking at this issue. And that's what I'm really arguing for. Let's have a bit of boldness. But
when I say 40 plus countries, that's just the European Convention on Human Rights. When it's the Refugee Convention from 1951, that's under the UN. So that's 100 plus countries, nearly 200.
Yes, but, this is a world that dealt with a pandemic. It's having to deal with Putin. It's having to deal with climate change. All these are difficult problems. If your starting point is, we're just never going to solve them, might as well give up and go home, then things are not going to get better. They're going to get a lot worse and a lot more dangerous.
What would a modern refugee convention look like?
Well, I think we need to stay true to the spirit of the old one, which was put in place so that if there was another Holocaust, Jews would have somewhere that they could flee to. And that was absolutely the right motive. But we're now in a situation where the Refugee Convention makes it very difficult not to accept anyone who comes to your borders. And the ECHR makes it very difficult to deport anyone who has already arrived. And the system is grinding to a halt. And people want solutions. And, if you had President Putin or Xi Jinping on Newscast, they would say to you, their systems are better because they say democracies can't take long-term decisions. We need to show them they're wrong.
I love that your eyes just looked at the screen there in case one of them was going to pop up. That would be an amazing moment. Surprise! Great endorsement for your book. Kemi Badenoch was talking today, though, about having some kind of review of our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. Would you sign up to do that for her?
Well,
you could get the ball rolling now.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on international law, but I will support Kemi in any way she asks me to. But we do need to look at these things, and we have to give people confidence. And I'm married to an immigrant. My wife's from China. In the past, I have notoriously said that she was from Japan.
Japanese, yes, which you explain in the book that you were a bit stressed at that point.
I think one of the best things about this country is that we are open to the brightest and best talent from all over the world. My worry is if people are scared that we can't control our own borders, that traditional British openness and generosity starts to be eroded, and we will lose one of the very best things about our country.
You mentioned Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor now. Did you read or listen to the speech he gave this morning?
Yes, I read about it.
Yeah, what do you think? Because it was billed as him sort of apologising for the mini budget, but actually he didn't quite go that far in the speech itself. What do you think about it? But he did definitely say it was a whole load of mistakes, and that is what trashed the Conservatives' reputation on managing the economy. What do you think of that as a strategy?
I mean, you were talking to the person who had to clear out the mess after the mini budget, and I, came in as Chancellor because it went wrong and reversed pretty much every measure in it. I remember you sitting at that desk with the flags behind you on a Monday morning when the markets were opening. Absolutely surreal. I completely endorse what Mel said. It was a catastrophic mistake, not economically, because we reversed the measures so quickly that there wasn't, I don't think, any real long-term damage. But politically, it has given something for Keir Starmer to beat us over the head with, as he does week in, week out. If you notice in Prime Minister's questions, he never talks about Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt. It's always Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So we moved on from that the moment that I became Chancellor and Rishi became Prime Minister. But we need to make sure the British public understand that too.
Did you and Rishi Sunak ever have conversations about whether you needed to kind of trash the mini budget a bit more? Because I remember at the time there were plenty of people in the Conservative family saying these guys need to do more to distance themselves from her, and people criticised Rishi Sunak for kind of almost being like too nice about Liz Truss, or maybe not too nice, but not critical enough. Did you ever think about, right, we need to have a moment where we kind of trash her?
Well, when you just had your worst defeat ever in your history, of course you ask yourself whether you got the political strategy right, and I'm sure we made mistakes. But I think at the time, in fairness, we just thought, the country doesn't want more drama, more Tory civil wars. They just want to get on and solve these problems, and that's what we were focused on doing. So we didn't think that was the right thing to do. But I think now, given that it's clear that Labour wants to talk about this the whole time, we do need to be absolutely clear with the country. We are the party of fiscal responsibility. We got lots of things wrong in our 14 years in office, but the one thing people trust the Conservatives to do is when the economy is in difficulty.
Trusted, past tense.
Yeah, and we have to regain that trust. But the one thing that people voted Conservative for over generations is that, when the economy is in difficulty, we'll take the tough and difficult decisions to get it back on its feet. Now, I think we did do that over those 14 years after the financial crisis, the pandemic and the energy shock. But yes, I think Mel Stride is right to say we will never, ever have another mini budget.
I mean, some people might think it's kind of karma for you guys, though, that Starmer blames you for the economy, because, I mean, that's what you guys did to Gordon Brown for not every year of 14 years, but certainly the first kind of 8 or 9.
Yeah, Liam Burns.
And it was a global... Exactly, Liam Burns, no. And the fact that the financial crisis Gordon Brown was dealing with was caused by subprime mortgages in America.
Yeah, no.
And you didn't give him... You didn't let him have that one.
Well, maybe what goes around comes around. I will say this. When I was Chancellor and I started to look more closely at what happened in the global financial crisis, I came to realise more than I had previously that actually Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling did a good job in stabilising not just the UK economy, but getting on the phone to finance ministers all around the world. And, I think that...
do you feel a bit bad about trashing their reputation then?
Well, they also made some big mistakes and, there's politics and maybe we're getting some payback today. I recognise that. But let me just, say something else. Although, politicians will always slag each other off, I think there is a football pitch-sized gap in the market right now for a party that's offering solutions. And when we talk about the future of the Conservative Party, I think we've had a year of contrition. Now we need to move on to ideas and solutions, because I think people are beginning to realise that's not going to come from Nigel Farage with £80 billion of unfunded tax cuts. Doesn't seem to be coming from, alas, from Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. And that's why I think, when it comes to Britain's role in the world, I hope this book, Can We Be Great Again, will give Kemi Badenoch some ideas as to how we can be that kind of big player in the world that I think a lot of people would like us to be.
Just on your way to the Newscast studio, we all got the news that Zia Yusuf had resigned as the chairman of Reform. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
I mean, don't give me your Conservative politician take. Give me your lifetime political geek take on that news alert that Zia Yusuf has resigned. I mean, he was like the man of the hour for the party of the hour.
Obviously, I don't know the inside track on this, but my immediate reaction is they have lost someone absolutely formidable. I've met him. I think he's a very, very impressive guy. That he was a big challenge for the Conservatives because, he's a formidable businessman, set up his own business, a very smart guy. So I don't know why Nigel Farage doesn't seem to be able to hold on to good people. But there's definitely something going on there.
Do you think the Conservatives should try and recruit Zia Yusuf?
Well,
That'd be a good reverse scalp, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he certainly has many Conservative values. Would
you welcome him into the Conservative Party?
I don't know enough about what he actually believes to know whether, across the board he would be a comfortable fit. But having met him, I will say this, I think he's a very impressive guy.
You talked about writing this book and hopefully giving Kemi Badenoch some ideas. I always wonder when people write books like this, sometimes it seems like a sort of audition for a job, or it's like a CV or a calling card. Is that in this case?
No, but I try to be objective, but you can never be wholly objective, can you? When you've been in the cabinet for over a decade, and all of us have a desire to tell their side of the story, and I do actually explain in the book how on earth it was that I came to call my Chinese wife Japanese, and I've never told that story publicly, and it was...
Well, tell it now. Tell it now. I hate to a minute ago. I'll give you the chance. Set the record straight.
Yeah, let me set them for my wife, if she's listening to news.
Well, and also she like plays a very big, more than a walk-on role in the book, and it's clear that you guys, like proper sweethearts. It's really cute.
She's a big part of my life. But so there I am, Foreign Secretary. I've been in the job just a month. And I have a very important visit. I'm travelling to Beijing to meet the Chinese foreign minister. And I'm a bit nervous. It's a big meeting.
And the Chinese are quite scary.
Yeah. And I had not just prepared what I was going to cover in the meeting, but I also prepared some small talking points. And at the very start of these big diplomatic meetings, all the world's media are there just to photograph the handshake and hear the initial words. So we shook hands and we sit down. And I had two bits of small talk. First was that both I and the Chinese foreign minister speak Japanese because he served in Tokyo and I lived in Japan for 2 years. And my second small talk was that my wife is Chinese. And so the two just got merged into one. And I said, it's wonderful to be here because my wife is Japanese. And I thought, maybe the world's media have left by now, and I carefully turned my head around, and there was this barrage of flashing cameras.
But she was cool with it, though, wasn't she? Once she woke up because of the time difference.
That was the problem. It was 8 hours ahead. She was fast asleep, and I was desperately trying to phone her. But when she finally did pick up the phone, she went konnichiwa, which is the Japanese for hello. So she's got a great sense of humour.
You know what was the upside of that, though, was that it dislodged that awkward video of you ringing the bell at the Olympics where the end of the bell falls off. So it dislodged that as Jeremy Hunt's most embarrassing moment.
Yes.
Which is one upside.
Yeah, there is one very small upside.
What was interesting for me is somebody, and I remember chasing you around Europe during the Brexit negotiations and like appearing unannounced outside various government buildings in other countries. What was interesting for me is reading about just the practicalities of diplomacy. And so when you've got two translators or interpreters, as they're called when they're doing it, and just how long it takes to have quite a simple conversation when it's got to be translated again, listened to, responded to, interpreted twice, and then so basically a very quick conversation takes hours.
That is absolutely the case. And particularly with the Chinese, they are masters at spinning out conversations, telling you about the 54th Communist Party Congress and the 13 points made by President Xi Jinping, and before you know it, the meeting's over. And so that one of the things that's interesting, but I'll tell you something else conversely. In order to try and cut through this, foreign ministers now always exchange mobile phone numbers. And I thought that my Foreign Office officials would be dead against this.
Yeah, because they like to take notice of all these things.
But no, they welcome it because if they want to get a message through to the French quickly, if the foreign ministers or the foreign secretary's got his opposite number's mobile number, you can do it. And so there's a network of foreign ministers WhatsApping each other, and obviously not classified information.
Well, in some cases,
yes, it's a good point actually. Maybe not in the case of the United States.
See, that worries me though, because that information should be going in the archives. It should be available to people from the Freedom of Information requests, and I'm not sure. It might help you guys do it quickly, but I'm not sure it's quite proper.
It's a difficult dilemma because I understand as a journalist, you want the freedom of information, you want to know the sunlight of transparency and so on. But the trouble is, if people think that everything they say is going to go public, then they just clam up. And you do need some private space where you can find out, I was the first foreign minister to visit Saudi Arabia after the horrific murder of Khashoggi. And I sat down, had a very difficult meeting with the Crown Prince. And you want to know that, both of you really, you want to know what he's thinking. And so you need to have some kind of
And actually,
space.
WhatsApp is quite a good way of doing that.
It can be.
I'm wondering how long you want to hang around in the House of Commons, because hearing you talk about your book, like you're really enthusiastic and you're excited about it, and I wonder if thinking big thoughts and having like dreaming big ideas is kind of more fun and more satisfying than being a backbench MP. No shade on your constituents, obviously, who I'm sure you love.
Yes, well, when the polls closed on election night, I had a huge fight in my own patch, and after the BBC published the exit polls, Electoral Calculus said I had a 2% chance of holding on to my seat,
which is not great odds.
98% chance of losing it, and I hung on to it. Don't know how really, and I'm so pleased to be back in the House of Commons, because there is a magic for all the cynicism that people feel about it. There is a magic about that place, and if you have got big ideas, things that you want to change, there is no better place to make that argument. And the thing I like about the House of Commons is that, yes, Keir Starmer's Prime Minister and Rachel Reeves is Chancellor, but there is a sense in which MPs treat each other as equals, and we're all colleagues, and you can talk to people and exchange ideas. And, I think our democracy's got lots of flaws, but actually we are pretty good at holding the government to account. So I'd like to stay.
And there is that thing about the House of Commons and the House of Parliament generally, that it's like not a huge office. Everyone's rubbing up against each other and like everyone's stopping to have a chat about things. It's much kind of closer and collegiate than people might think from seeing it on TV.
It is.
Right, last question. We started this episode of Newscast by getting people to write in about if they've been in the backdrop of a politician's speech. This is after Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday with the quite bored-looking bus manufacturers. What do you think of this thing of having a bunch of people stood behind you while you're addressing the nation? Should we just get rid of it?
It's fake. And the thing is, but I'm sure I must have done it myself.
Can't wait to check the archives now.
You'll find
hypocrite.
Exactly. You're bound to find me doing it, and but it's fake. So obviously, what politicians are trying to do is to make it look like they're with people and they're talking to people and they're not putting themselves in some ivory tower. But if we want to learn about communication, love him or loathe him, we should look at Trump. Trump doesn't do kind of artificial things like that. He just spends 2 or 3 hours every day talking to people. He is always on TV. He's always on social media. And you feel with Trump, you're getting the real deal. You're getting what he actually thinks. And I think that in democratic politics, we've got to change the way we do things. That Trump spends a couple of hours a day. That was never part of my routine as Chancellor or Foreign Secretary. I might do a media interview once a week or a couple of times a week in a
Whereas he just
week.
calls into his favourite shows.
And I'd be prepared by my team of officials, and they try and make sure you don't make a faux pas or a gaffe. And once you've got over it, relax until the next media round. Trump doesn't do any of that. He is continually talking to people and listening to people, and it works. I mean, as I say, it doesn't mean you have to agree with what he says, but that's the way you communicate.
And in the book, there is a great moment where actually quite a big foreign policy thing happens while you're in the room with Theresa May and Donald Trump. And basically she dries up because she can't do small talk. And you dive in and basically make quite a big change when it comes to Syria. But people will have to read the book to find out about that because we've run out of time. But thanks very much for chatting to us on Newscast.
Absolute pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.